In this episode, we move into one of the most important realities of responsible artificial intelligence, AI governance. Deployment is not the end of the work. For many brand new learners, it is easy to imagine that once a system is approved, integrated, and placed into a live environment, the hard part is mostly finished and the organization can simply enjoy the benefits unless something obvious breaks. Real AI operations do not work that way, because the live environment keeps changing even when the code appears stable and the model itself looks familiar from one week to the next. Data shifts, users adapt their behavior, business goals evolve, edge cases appear, and hidden weaknesses become visible only after the system begins interacting with daily work at real speed and real scale. That is why mature organizations conduct ongoing monitoring, maintenance, updates, and retraining after deployment instead of treating launch as a finish line. The key lesson from the start is simple. A deployed AI system is not a static asset. It is an active part of the organization's operating environment, and that means it must be watched, cared for, adjusted, and governed for as long as it remains in use. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to understand post-deployment governance is to compare it to running a busy public transit system rather than buying a bus and parking it in a garage. The bus may have passed inspection before service began, but that tells you only that it was ready to start, not that it can safely and reliably serve passengers forever without oversight. Routes change, road conditions change, weather changes, passenger behavior changes, and even a well-built vehicle needs regular inspection, servicing, and occasional repair if it is going to keep working well. A deployed AI system operates in the same way because it enters a world that keeps moving around it. The organization cannot rely forever on the conditions that existed when testing was completed or when the deployment decision was approved. For a beginner, this is one of the biggest shifts from technical excitement to governance maturity. The question is no longer only whether the system can perform. The question is whether the organization can keep the system dependable, bounded, and defensible as the environment around it changes over time. Ongoing monitoring is the first part of that responsibility, and it means more than checking whether the system is online. A live AI deployment should be observed for changes in output quality, error patterns, response consistency, security concerns, user complaints, workflow effects, fairness signals, and the kinds of tasks people are asking it to handle. A system can remain available every day and still drift into weaker, less safe, or less appropriate behavior without producing the kind of obvious outage that traditional software teams often expect. That is why monitoring should be tied to the real purpose of the deployment rather than to technical uptime alone. For a beginner, the most important insight is that live monitoring is a way of listening for weakening trust before the organization suffers a full incident. The system may still appear useful on the surface, but careful monitoring can reveal that outputs are becoming less reliable, more brittle, more confusing, or more risky in specific parts of the workflow long before those weaknesses become impossible to ignore. Strong monitoring depends on knowing what normal looks like, because teams cannot detect meaningful change if they never defined what acceptable operation was supposed to be. Before or during deployment, the organization should establish practical baselines for how the system normally behaves, what quality level is expected, what categories of error are tolerable, and what trends would suggest a meaningful shift in performance or safety. Those baselines might include ordinary response patterns, expected review rates, common failure modes, acceptable turnaround time, typical user escalation frequency, or a known range of variation in output quality. Once those markers exist, the organization can compare current behavior against them instead of reacting only to instinct or anecdote. For a beginner, this matters because many governance failures happen slowly rather than suddenly. A system may weaken by small degrees over many weeks, and if nobody has a baseline, that decline may feel normal simply because it happened gradually. Good monitoring protects against that kind of quiet deterioration by giving the organization a clearer sense of whether the live system is still behaving within the boundaries that made deployment acceptable in the first place. Monitoring must also look beyond the system itself and examine how people are interacting with it after deployment. Sometimes the AI changes very little, while the human workflow around it changes a great deal. Users may begin depending on it more heavily, skipping reviews they were originally expected to perform, entering different kinds of information than the system was approved to handle, or stretching it into new tasks because it seemed helpful in one narrow area. These behavioral shifts can create governance problems even if the model has not changed at all. For a beginner, this is one of the clearest examples of why post-deployment oversight is socio-technical rather than purely technical. The organization has to watch not only machine behavior, but also human behavior, because many serious failures happen when a tool that was designed for support quietly becomes a tool for substitution. Monitoring should therefore include signs of over-reliance, misuse, scope expansion, and fading skepticism among users, since those patterns can erode safety and accountability even when the system remains polished and fast. Maintenance is the next major responsibility, and it should be understood broadly rather than as simple technical repair. In a live AI deployment, maintenance can include refreshing documentation, checking data connections, correcting broken integrations, updating user instructions, refining prompts or workflow logic, revising access permissions, and making sure fallback processes still work if the system becomes unavailable or unreliable. In other words, maintenance is the work of keeping the broader operating environment healthy enough for the system to remain useful and governable. A beginner should not imagine maintenance as something that happens only deep in the software, where engineers quietly fix hidden code. A great deal of AI maintenance lives in the surrounding system of people, permissions, knowledge sources, business rules, and review habits. If those surrounding parts weaken, the deployment may become unsafe or ineffective even when the model itself has not obviously changed. Good maintenance therefore protects the whole service, not just the technical core, because what users experience and what governance can defend depends on the total system rather than on the model in isolation. The cadence of this work matters a great deal because post-deployment governance becomes fragile when it depends on memory or individual heroics. Organizations need repeatable rhythms for review, with clear responsibility for who watches signals, who interprets them, who owns routine maintenance, and who has authority to decide when something needs closer scrutiny or corrective action. Some monitoring may happen continuously through automated signals, while other reviews may happen daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly, depending on the seriousness of the use case and the speed at which the operating environment changes. What matters is not that every system has the same schedule, but that each deployed system has a deliberate one. For a beginner, this is an important governance lesson because strong oversight is usually boring in a productive way. It is not built on emergency energy. It is built on predictable review habits, documented ownership, and a shared understanding that the system will be revisited even when nothing dramatic appears to be wrong, because that is often how organizations catch slow-moving problems before they become painful. Updates are another part of life after deployment, and they need to be governed with more care than many teams initially expect. An update might change model instructions, swap out a component, improve a safety filter, revise a workflow, adjust access rules, refresh a retrieval source, or fix a bug that users noticed in operation. Even when an update seems small, it can alter the way the system behaves in ways that affect trust, consistency, or downstream outcomes. That is why change control matters after deployment just as much as it mattered before launch. For a beginner, the main lesson is that no meaningful update should be treated as harmless by default. The organization should ask what changed, why it changed, what parts of the workflow may be affected, what new testing is needed, and whether users need notice or new guidance before the revised system is relied on in normal operations. Updates are often necessary and beneficial, but they are also governance events because they can change the evidence base that originally supported the decision to deploy. Retraining is a deeper form of change, and it deserves especially careful handling. In simple terms, retraining means adjusting the model itself using new or revised data, so that the internal behavior of the system changes in response to what it has learned. This can help when the environment has shifted when patterns in the world have changed, or when evaluation shows the model no longer fits the deployment context well enough. But retraining is not routine housekeeping, and it is not automatically the right answer every time live performance becomes disappointing. If the new data is weak, biased, unrepresentative, or poorly scoped, retraining can make the system more specialized in the wrong direction or more confident without becoming more trustworthy. For a beginner, the best way to think about retraining is as a major intervention rather than a casual tune-up. It should happen because evidence shows it is needed, because the organization understands what problem it is trying to solve, and because there is a plan for evaluating the retrained system before it is allowed to shape live work again. One of the main reasons retraining enters the conversation is drift, which refers to the way real-world conditions can move away from the assumptions built into the deployed system. Data drift happens when the type or pattern of incoming information changes. Concept drift happens when the meaning of the patterns themselves changes, so that signals that once pointed to one outcome no longer point there as reliably. In live operations, drift can arise because users change their behavior, policies change, products change, customer populations change, language evolves, or outside conditions reshape the environment in which the system operates. For a beginner, drift is important because it reminds us that no model stays perfectly matched to the world forever. Sometimes a maintenance change or workflow fix is enough to handle the problem. Other times the shift is deeper, and the model itself needs to be reevaluated or retrained. Good post-deployment governance does not assume drift is rare or embarrassing. It assumes drift is a natural possibility and builds observation and response practices strong enough to detect it before the deployment becomes quietly misaligned with the world it is supposed to serve. Documentation remains crucial after deployment because every monitoring finding, maintenance decision, update, and retraining action becomes part of the governance history of the system. If the organization notices degrading output quality, narrows the use case, modifies guidance, retrains the model, or changes the review process, those actions should be recorded in a way that future reviewers can understand. This record helps internal teams maintain continuity, supports audits, improves incident response, and gives leadership a defensible account of why the system remained active, what changed over time, and how the organization responded to emerging concerns. For a beginner, this shows that documentation is not only a pre-launch obligation. It is part of keeping the deployment explainable after it begins evolving in the real world. Without good records, teams may forget why a safeguard was added, lose visibility into how behavior changed, or repeat old mistakes because the learning from earlier monitoring and maintenance was never captured clearly enough to guide later decisions. Another important feature of strong post-deployment governance is the feedback loop between routine oversight and incident readiness. Ongoing monitoring and maintenance should not exist in a separate world from issue management, audits, red teaming, or security review. If user complaints increase, if a recurring weakness appears in outputs, if audits reveal a control gap, or if a red team exercise exposes a brittle behavior, those findings should influence how the system is maintained and whether updates or retraining are appropriate. In the same way, monitoring plans should help the organization notice when a small issue is beginning to look like a larger pattern that deserves formal investigation. For a beginner, this integrated view matters because real systems do not separate themselves neatly into categories. Weakness discovered through one governance channel should strengthen the others. A mature organization does not wait for a major public failure before changing how it watches and maintains a deployment. It treats small findings as useful evidence and lets them shape the ongoing stewardship of the system while the risks are still easier to manage. Several misconceptions can weaken this work if they are left unchallenged. One is the belief that strong testing before launch removes the need for close monitoring afterward. Another is the idea that retraining is always the best way to fix disappointing results. A third is the assumption that maintenance is mostly a technical matter that ordinary managers and users do not need to understand. A fourth is the belief that if no one is complaining loudly, the system must still be healthy enough to leave alone. For a beginner, it is important to reject all four of these ideas. Pre-launch testing does not freeze the world in place. Retraining can create new problems if done carelessly, Maintenance often depends on business process and human behavior, and the absence of loud complaints may simply mean the system is degrading quietly in ways that are hard for users to name. Responsible post-deployment governance starts with humility about how much live systems can change and how easily early success can create false confidence. A simple example can tie these ideas together. Imagine an organization deploys an AI assistant to help staff answer internal policy questions. At launch, the system performs well, staff appreciate the time savings, and leadership considers the deployment a success. Over the next several months, however, policy documents change. New teams begin using the tool for slightly different purposes, and staff start trusting its answers more quickly because it has been convenient and usually sounds confident. Good ongoing monitoring would detect whether the assistant is retrieving outdated material, whether certain categories of questions are being answered less reliably, and whether users are escalating fewer doubtful cases than expected. Good maintenance would refresh the knowledge sources, update user instructions, and tighten access if certain information should not be included. A governed update process would test changes before broad release, and retraining would be considered only if the underlying model itself was no longer fitting the job. For a beginner, the lesson is that what protects the organization is not the initial success alone. It is the continued discipline that keeps success from decaying into unmanaged risk. As we close, the central lesson is that after deployment, an AI system enters a long period of stewardship rather than a passive period of operation. Ongoing monitoring helps the organization see whether the live system remains aligned with expectations, with user behavior, and with the real environment in which it now operates. Maintenance keeps the broader service healthy by preserving documentation, data quality, workflow integrity, permissions, and review practices. Updates allow the organization to correct weaknesses and adapt responsibly, while retraining offers a deeper intervention when evidence shows the model itself no longer matches the job. For a new learner, the most important idea is that responsible deployment is not proven on launch day. It is proven over time through disciplined observation, careful adjustment, clear documentation, and the willingness to act when the live system begins moving away from the conditions that once made it acceptable. That long-term discipline is what turns a promising deployment into a governable one.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.